Crisis management. All of us at some point in our lives, maybe multiple points in our life, will come up against a crisis that we need to manage. It may be a big crisis that affects a lot of people. It may be a small crisis that only affects us. But crisis management is something we will all have to do. And the question is, are you ready? The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development is an organization that works with governments to understand what drives economic, social, and environmental change. They do many things, including setting international standards on a wide range of topics, from agriculture and tax to the safety of chemicals. They compare how different countries' school systems are readying their young people for modern life and how different countries' pension systems will look after their citizens in old age, and many things in between. Given the world we live in, thinking about Deepwater Horizon, Fukushima, Ebola, etc., crisis management is incredibly important. The OECD recently released a report on crisis management, in which they said, recent crises have challenged political leadership and risk managers in many countries, often due to unexpected or unforeseen circumstances, but also due to weak links and breakdowns in information flow. So with that, I've got a question for you. Is there a weak link in the information flow of the LDS Church? Marlon K. Jensen, who was first quorum of the 70 and church historian and recorder from 2005 to 2012, gave a fireside back in 2011. And he said something very interesting. He said, maybe since Kirtland, we've never had a period of, I'll call it apostasy, like we're having now. Wait, what? Seriously? Let me read it again. Maybe since Kirtland, we've never had a period of, I'll call it apostasy, like we're having now. Now that was given in 2011, and it caused a little bit of a stir, and the church has since backed away from it a little bit. There's a Fair article that talks about it and said it was overstated, but the fact is he said it, and there is some validity to it. So the question is, what can we do to stop it? Well, first, we have to understand it. What is going on that is causing this crisis? Luckily, he tells us. In the same fireside, he said, we realize that people basically get their information through Googling. They don't come to LDS.org. If they get there, it's through Google. Now, why would the church be concerned if people get information from Google? He goes on to say that the church is investing in SEO, or search engine optimization, to try and put LDS.org as one of the first results when people Google things, so people get their info there instead of somewhere else. Well, that's good. He goes on to say something that really caught my attention. He said, we are trying to create an offering that will address these issues and be available for the public at large, for church leaders, because many of them don't have answers either, which can be very disappointing to church members and to people who are losing their faith or have lost it, and we hope to regain to the church. Church leaders don't have answers either. That really stuck out to me. It's clear this is an issue. In fact, Elder Jensen clarified and said that the church has launched a program to staunch its losses. President Monson has called the campaign The Rescue and made it his signature initiative. Elder Jensen goes on to say, where has the prophet laid his emphasis right now? It's on something called the rescue, and with good reason, because we are suffering a loss, both in terms of our new converts that come in and don't get really established in the church, as well as very faithful members who, because of things we're talking about, as well as others, are losing their faith in the process. It is one of our biggest concerns right now. That is the weak link in the information flow of the LDS Church. Reuters ran a special report entitled Mormonism, Besieged by the Modern Age. In it, they said, over the years, church literature has largely glossed over some of the more controversial aspects of its history. And they pointed to that as one of the main reasons people are losing their faith. People are Googling and reading and then doubting. It's pretty obvious this is a concern, and we've probably all heard about it in General Conference. In fact, I just did a quick search on LDS.org looking for conference talks that address this since the fireside with Elder Jensen. It wasn't very hard to find talk after talk after talk that was addressing this issue. If you go to LDS.org and go to the General Conference section, you'll find many talks discussing people losing their faith, discussing these issues that we're about to talk about. And in fact, on LDS.org, it's not just in General Conference. We're seeing it everywhere. In CES firesides, in the LDS newsroom, everywhere you look, the LDS Church is on the defense, seemingly trying to plug the holes, including a special section called the Gospel Topics Essays on LDS.org, which tackles these controversial issues specifically. So with that, this discussion today may become the first in a series of discussions in which I would like to cover some of these topics that are causing the issues. Why? Why do I want to talk about them? Well, for two reasons. First, I have kids, and I don't want my kids sideswiped by some snarky internet article. The Pew Research Center did a study where they looked at the religious affiliation in the various generations. And a very interesting trend, spooky trend, is the number of people who are unaffiliated. It grows in every generation. Now, my children are much younger than even the younger millennials here, so I can assume that the generation that my kids are a part of is going to have an even larger percentage of unaffiliated. My kids, your kids, the youth of the church are going to be directly affected by this, and we need to attack it head on. Well, how do we do that? Well, that's the second reason that I want to talk about these. We need to know. Do you remember what Elder Jensen said? Here's the quote again. We are trying to create an offering that will address these issues and be available for the public at large, for church leaders, because many of them don't have answers either, which can be very disappointing to church members and to people who are losing their faith or have lost it, and we hope to regain to the church. Many church leaders don't have answers. If we're going to attack this head on, we need to understand these issues and we need to be able to address them. It may be uncomfortable at times for us to talk about them, but we need to be ready. If somebody we know, it could be a friend, a spouse, a child, a grandchild, anyone could Google, read, doubt, and then come to us and say, have you heard? What do you think about? And if we haven't heard about it, if we haven't studied it, if we don't know, how are we going to help those people? How are we going to keep them where they need to be? A scripture comes to mind from Matthew chapter 18, where the Lord says, how think ye, if a man have 100 sheep, and one of them be gone astray, doth he not leave the 99 and goeth into the mountains, and seeketh that which is gone astray? And if so be that he find it, verily I say unto you, he rejoiceth more of that sheep than of the 99 which went not astray. That's what we need to do. We need to help those sheep that are going astray, those ones that have Googled, have read, and have doubted, and have one foot out the door. But we can't do that if we don't understand these issues. So we know what is happening, right? An apostasy, mass apostasy. Maybe that's a little dramatic, but that's what's happening. And we know how. People are Googling about the church and finding information. But we don't know why. So to help us understand why, I'd like to talk a little bit about Dr. James W. Fowler. Now, Dr. Fowler is a graduate of Duke University and Drew Theological Seminary. He earned his PhD at Harvard University in Religion and Society in 1971 with a focus in ethics and sociology of religion. He pursued postdoctoral studies at the Center for Moral Development at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and he taught at Harvard Divinity School at the Boston College. In 1977, he joined the faculty of Emory Chandler's School of Theology. Emory named him the Charles Howard Candler Professor of Theology and Human Development in 1987. His pioneering research and the resulting theory of faith development have earned him international recognition. This guy knows what he's talking about. His best-known book, Stages of Faith, The Psychology of Development and the Quest for Meaning, is in its 38th printing and has been translated into multiple languages. This book approaches faith not necessarily as religious or as it's equated with belief, but rather faith as a person's way of leaning into life and making sense of life, more verb than noun. Faith is the dynamic system of images, values, and commitments that guides one's life. So in his book, he has the stages of faith. The first stage Fowler calls the intuitive projective faith, and it usually occurs between the ages of 3 and 7 and is characterized by the psyche's unprotected exposure to the unconscious. Imagination runs wild in this stage, uninhibited by logic. It's the first step in self-awareness, and when one absorbs one's culture's strong taboos. The advantages of this stage are the birth of imagination and the growing ability to grasp and unify one's perception of reality. Stage 1 is also dangerous, though, in that the child's imagination can be possessed by unrestrained images of terror and destruction from the unconscious, and the exploitation of the fertile imagination by enforced taboos and indoctrination. This usually happens between the ages of 2 and 7. The second stage of faith is called the mythic literal faith. It happens sometime after age 7, usually up to about age 13. And it's when symbol and ritual begin to be integrated by the child. These symbols, however, are one-dimensional. Only literal interpretations of myth and symbol are possible. The runaway imagination of stage 1 is harnessed in this second stage, and linear thinking becomes normative. It's found mostly in school children, although one can maintain this stage for life. Stage 2 persons have a strong belief in the justice and reciprocity of the universe, and their cosmic powers are almost always anthropomorphic. Objective distance and critical evaluation of myth or symbology is impossible. Fowler describes a person in this stage as being both carried and trapped in their own narrative. Stage 2 can be dangerous because the relentless belief in reciprocity forces the individual into a strict, over-controlling perfectionism. The religious system will without doubt be either legalistic, or else, in the case of abuse, the child may be convinced of his or her own irredeemability. The third stage, the synthetic conventional faith, is the stage the majority of the population find its permanent home in. Many people go through stage 1, stage 2, settle in stage 3, and that's where they're at. It usually arises sometime during adolescence, and this stage demands a complex pattern of socialization and integration, and faith is an inseparable factor in the ordering of one's world. It is a stage characterized by conformity, where one finds one's identity by aligning oneself with a certain perspective, and lives directly through this perception with little opportunity to reflect on it critically. One has an ideology at this point, but may not be aware that they have it. Those who differ in opinion are seen as the other, as different kinds of people. Authority derives from the top down and is invested with the power by majority opinion. Dangers in this stage include the internalization of symbolic systems, power, goodness, badness, to such a degree that objective evaluation is impossible. Furthermore, while one can at this stage enter into an intimate relationship with the divine, one's life situations may drive one into despair, the threshold to the next stage. Such situations may include contradictions between authorities, the revelation of authoritarian hypocrisy, and lived experiences which contradict one's convictions. These can lead them into despair, which then can take them to stage 4. So looking at, oh man, really? Sorry. So revisiting stage 3, which was where the majority of the population finds its permanent home, we find the reliance and trust in certain authority figures. We find literal belief. We find expectation of unity among members of the quote-unquote flock. And that is where most people find a permanent home, is in stage 3. Those in stage 3 are good at making connections to their own faith, but often without thinking beyond the connection or rationalizing it. Stage 4 consists of people who have begun to and eventually lose most of their trust in authority figures and instead place their trust in themselves. It's called the individuative reflective faith. This stage may be characterized by anger and frustration, coupled with a feeling of betrayal or that one has been lied to. Many in stage 4 want to pull back the curtain for others so that they might no longer be ignorant. This stage has also been referred to as the angry doubter. We've often heard the quote, "You can leave the church, but you can't leave it alone." Generally speaking, the people who can leave the church but can't leave it alone have left stage 3 and gone to stage 4. Now the key here is to get past stage 4 to stage 5. For Mormons, it means uncovering all of the uncomfortable stuff and dealing with it. Having a crisis of your faith, managing that crisis, and coming out the other side. If you do that, your testimony will be stronger, your faith will be more entrenched. Now, whether it is us going through this crisis or someone we know, we must be ready to help as people exit stage 3, get to stage 4, and need to go to stage 5. So stage 5 is the conjunctive faith. It's usually not literal, but the metaphorical meanings that have the most significance and are most important. It moves one from stage 4's rationalism to acknowledgement of paradox and transcendence. It is in this stage that one chooses regression in the service of transcendence. In this stage, a person grasps the reality behind the symbols of his or her inherited system and is also drawn to and acknowledging of the symbols of other systems. This stage makes room for mystery in the unconscious, is fascinated by it while at the same time apprehensive of its power. It sees the power behind the metaphors while simultaneously acknowledging their relativity. In stage 5, the world, demythologized in stage 4, is now resacralized, literally brimming with vision. It is also imbued with a new sense of justice that goes beyond justice defined by one's own culture and people. Because one has begun to see the bigger picture, the walls, culture, and tradition have built between ourselves and others begins to erode. It is not easy to live on the cusp of paradox, and due to its radical drive towards inclusivity, the mind struggles to assimilate and integrate faster than it can work through its cultural and psychological baggage. It is an overwhelming, ecstatic stage in which one is radically opened to the possibility and wonder. So, that's where we want to get. When people Google and they read and they doubt, they leave stage 3, go to stage 4. We need to get them through stage 4 to stage 5. Now, what can happen when one enters stage 4? And why do we want to help them through to stage 5? There is a very good example of somebody who left stage 3, went to stage 4, and never made it to stage 5. His name is Hans Mattson. He was the LDS European Area Authority 70 from 2000 to 2005. And I have a video here of an interview with him.
My whole world was crashing. I was born and raised, I didn't know anything about this. The church was wonderful, it was true. The church was guided by Jesus himself. And now when I'm reading this, and I started to understand that I need the strength to accept the truth.
Hans Mattson grew up in the Mormon Church in Sweden and became a high-ranking leader who helped oversee the church throughout Europe. Now he is publicly sharing his doubts about the history and teachings of the church.
So how did you go from being in a position of helping teach people about the faith to having doubts about the faith?
When members are using the internet, as I usually call a crystal ball, you can't hide anything, everything is there. They find out a lot of questions about especially about the church history. And of course, being a kind of a high leader in the church, I also have those questions to me, and I have to try to deal with them. And when I did that, we found out that the church, as I look at it, didn't give me any answers, really.
The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as the Mormon Church is formally known, has always taught that the Book of Mormon, its core scripture, is historically true. But in the era of the Internet, church members have access to information that appears contradictory. For example, there is no DNA evidence to support the Book of Mormon's claims that American Indians descended from Jews, or that steel swords existed when the book says they were used.
Is the Book of Mormon historical or not? The blacks and the priesthood, why did the blacks didn't have the priesthood? Was it a prophet, really?
To its credit, the church has made volumes of documents about its founder and prophet, Joseph Smith, available to historians. But those documents reveal things that the church doesn't teach most of its members, such as the fact that Joseph Smith took many wives, some very young.
But when you study this history, you find that there are girls working in Joseph Smith's home. As you call them maidens, they clean and wash and things. And those are the girls he married. And Emma, his first wife, wouldn't know about it. And for me, that's terrible. You just been 14, 15 years, and you put so much pressure on them, and you can read the letters, what he wrote to them.
The church says it is trying to be transparent and that believers in every church have doubts. But when Mr. Mattson brought his questions to his superiors, he says they told him to stay silent.
What I felt kind of sad about, and I felt I didn't really like, was that they said that you're not supposed to talk to your wife, your children. You don't to talk about these issues in church.
Hans Mattson says he is not alone in suffering a crisis of faith and that there are consequences. Mormons who admit their doubts can be prohibited from attending weddings and baptisms, and friends and family members sometimes cut off contact.
Really, why I'm sitting here and why I'm here in the United States is because I can see that there are so many friends of mine, members in the church, that are being hurt. They're going through a terrible faith crisis, as I did. I mean, I've been in this for 8 years, and today I feel quite normal about this. But why shall they be so hurt by that, just because the church is not telling the whole story or the true story? My hope is that the church will grow more larger in acceptance that you are allowed to have doubts, because I think a doubter is a seeker. I mean, you can go to Joseph Smith. Why did he pray? He was asking what to do. So he was a doubter, wasn't he? And I think that's great. You find answers.
So Hans Matson clearly left stage 3 and went to stage 4. But when he reached out to his superiors, according to the story that he tells, he was told to stay quiet. He was not helped into stage 5. He was not helped to understand and to cope. And he lost, just like Dr. Fowler talks about. He lost his faith in the authority figures, and he began to doubt, and he's in stage 4. He's the angry doubter. He can leave the church, but he can't leave it alone. He organized a discussion group in Sweden where he had more than 600 people show up, according to him, to address some of these questions that people had Googled and not found adequate answers. And the church sent Elder Jensen and Richard E. Tolley Jr., who is now the managing director of the Public Affairs Department, to allay the Swedes' concerns without a lot of success. So that is what we want to avoid. We don't want to necessarily keep people in stage 3 and avoid stage 4, but anybody who gets to stage 4 needs to have a clear path to stage 5 of their faith. So what are these issues specifically? What are we going to focus on? Well, a study was done called Understanding Mormon Disbelief. Why do some Mormons lose their testimony, and what happens to them when they do? In this study, there were 3,086 Mormons who no longer believe. 56% of those no longer attend church. 20% attended weekly. 24% are partially active. So out of over 3,000 Mormons who no longer believed, 20% attend church weekly. 24% are partially active. That means the next time you go to church, you might be sitting next to one of those people, and you may not even know it. All the more reason for us to understand these issues and tackle them head on. Now, these people who no longer believe, they averaged 15 or more major issues that contributed to them losing their testimony, with 13 minor issues. So this is not a case of they Googled, they learned one thing and left, or they Googled and learned 2 things and left, or lost their faith. This is a serious problem. These people found 15 or more major issues, 13 or more minor issues that they could not reconcile in their belief structure and in their mind, that caused them to lose their faith. That is unacceptable. There needs to be more information. We need to tackle these head on. We have truth, and truth does not fear inquiry. There is no reason for this. So when you look at the demographics of these people and callings that they've held in the church, you see that many of them were missionaries. A lot of them were elders quorum presidents, young men's presidents, mission leaders. A lot of them were in the bishopric. Many of them had been temple workers, high priest group leaders. They'd been on a high council. They'd been in stake auxiliary presidencies. They'd even been in stake presidencies and mission presidencies. Mission presidencies. Presidents over missionaries who are going out to teach people the gospel. And they found issues that they could not reconcile with their faith. The study looked at many of the issues, and they extrapolated the data to show issues that had been trending over time, and issues that were of low importance or high importance. So you can see here the boxes, issues fairly low importance that were trending up, or high importance trending down, which were none. So for this series of lectures, we are going to focus on the top right box, the high importance issues, treatment of homosexuals, historical issues in general, polygamy, polyandry, DNA in the Book of Mormon, Book of Abraham, the first vision, the treatment of women, science. Now, an interesting thing, when you look at these issues as found from the study, and you compare it with the Gospel Topics essays that are on LDS.org, you see a lot of correlation. So it is clear that the church is aware, and the church is trying to address it. Things like the Book of Abraham is on both of them. Polygamy, plural marriage is on both of them. The First Vision is on both of them. A lot of correlation between these two lists. So this is where we're going to start. As we go through these lectures, we will start with these issues and we will tackle them one by one so that we can understand them and we are not Googling and doubting and then leaving. So with that, we'll close. Thank you.